You're listening to the Microsoft Innovation Podcast, where we explore the intersection of people, business, and technology. This year, we're adding a new show to our lineup, The AI Advantage, to help you learn the skills you need to thrive in the AI era.
Welcome to the Ecosystem Show. We're thrilled to have you with us. Here we challenge traditional mindsets and explore innovative approaches to maximizing the value of your software estate. We don't expect you to agree with everything. Challenge us, share your thoughts, and let's grow together. Now, let's dive in. It's showtime. Welcome back to the Ecosystem Show. We are on the air, the three of us all over the world. Me in New Zealand. Andrew and Anna, where are you guys?
We're in the US. We are doing our our normal period in Provincetown, Massachusetts.
Nice.
I'm in Andrew's mom's home, and Andrew ran away from us.
I am in the Cloud Lighthouse Boston office, which is a bit of a misnomer because it's actually about a 90-minute voyage across the bay to Boston, but it's as close as we get. So
nice.
And we have a podcast recording room here in this office, which is excellent. Wicked. So here I sit.
Very cool. Andrew, I think it's been some time since you've been on the podcast. In fact, you went to the AI for Good event, which is interesting and becoming a topic of discussion. I'm talking with a company in Australia at the moment, and they were involved in the AI for Good as well. And it seemed like a phenomenal event. Where was it? And can you tell us about, what was it about?
Yeah. So the short answer is that earlier in July, I represented the Center for Trustworthy AI and Microsoft and Cloud Lighthouse, but the center was top of mind for me, at the AI for Good Global Summit in Geneva, Switzerland. This is, that's the name of what is the United Nations Conference on Artificial Intelligence. And it happens every year, every summer. Actually, interestingly, has been going on since before the generative AI wave. So long before kind of the current rapid evolution of the technology and, of course, the market hype around that technology. But it's just grown exponentially in the last several years. There were about 15,000 people at this event in Switzerland last year. The event is sponsored by the International Telecommunications Union, ITU, which is the global governance body that plays a big role in global cooperation and governance around telecommunications issues. A good example is that when a company or a country wants to put a satellite into orbit of Earth, there's coordination that goes into that, right? That, around, will these satellites collide with one another? Will their spectrum at a particular place orbiting the Earth interfere with the work of other satellites? So they do far more than just artificial intelligence and the global governance and policy making around AI. But it's a huge event, and it actually is linked with a parallel event called the World Summit on the Information Society, which goes to United Nations and kind of global coordination around communication and information technology and what's available in various regions of the world. So really great event.
So when Andrew said he was at this event, I did not believe that he was actually going. And then I saw on the UN website this, photo taken, and here we go, front and center, representing. Lo and behold, there he is. And by the way, this article here, very interesting. If you should take a look at it and how you contribute to a big UN initiative here. But there he is, no denying it, front and center in the photo. So well done, Andrew.
So one thing about this, if you bring the photo back there, Mark, just as a little aside. So this panel that Jason Slater from UNIDO, Jason is the fellow on the very end in the corner in the gray shirt who's sort of looking back down the row of us in the front row.
This guy,
Jason
yeah.
asked me, yep. Jason's a great guy and a very, very smart, very good thinker around this kind of technology. He comes from the United Nations Industrial Development Office. So something that he's working on is building the AI industrial capacity in regions and nations around the world. That's his priority. So in any case, Jason asked me to come join him on this panel. But the way the timing worked, it was right before I was flying out. So I showed up to this panel, and I've got assistant undersecretaries, undersecretary generals of the United Nations sitting there in suits, and I'm wearing my jeans and my linen shirt and everything, like I'm about to clear out of there. But no one commented, and it all seemed well received. So it was a great event.
What was the thing that kind of stuck in your mind? Because I know this is a last minute decision for us to represent at this event. And it was a big event, right? It wasn't tiny by any stretch.
15,000 people, not just 15,000 people. So it was big in terms of the number of people there, but it was also big in terms of the representation there. So folks who were there included, heads of state, the president of Estonia, who is himself I don't know exactly what his discipline is, but I believe he's a PhD. I mean, the president of Estonia, outside of maybe the president of Romania, might be the single smartest head of state in the world. So, there were heads of state there. Werner Vogels, who is the chief technology officer of Amazon, he was present at this. There was an address by a fellow named Yoshua Bengio, who is a computer scientist at a university in Canada. The name of the university escapes me, but this man is apparently the most cited in terms of other academic work, citing his work. He is the most cited scientist in the world of any discipline, of any scientific discipline. So it was not only big in terms of the quantity and the volume of people, but I think it was also big in terms of the minds and the thinkers and the policymakers that it attracts. So just a few shout outs. I think a fellow named John Gibson, who I really enjoyed spending time with there. John is one of the senior partners at the world's third largest law firm, DLA Piper. They are doing phenomenal work both in using artificial intelligence in the practice of law, but also thinking from a legal perspective about how law needs to be applied to the practice of artificial intelligence. And he gave a little talk at the speaker's welcome reception on the first night, and he got up there and he said that, for the first time really ever, technologists and lawyers need one another, and they need one another at the beginning. And he and I kind of, locked eyes from across the room and probably chatted 10 or 15 times over the next 3 days because, this is exactly the message that we've been advocating so strongly at the Center for Trustworthy AI. And it's great to see someone so senior at this massive global law firm thinking the same way. So, John and his team were there. I spent some time chatting with some folks from Deloitte, the consulting firm, including the chairman of their board globally. They have some, I think, really, they're doing some very good thinking around. I mean, everyone is sort of pollinating these ideas, but I do think that we're now reaching a stage where we're starting to see concrete things coming out of, this question of what is required in order to make AI trustworthy.
Yeah. And so interesting is that I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and this whole thing between law and tech coming together has massively been influenced by the EU AI Act. That in a lot of the working and stuff that they've done around it is that you cannot have one without the other. A law firm can't just go in and ignore the tech, and tech companies can't just go in and ignore the legal ramifications. And I think at the moment, in my observations of the tech companies I've been talking with, it's not that they're ignoring it. They're not even aware that they need to be aware of it.
I feel like it's a bit like when companies who made wheels came together with companies who made luggage, and then we have luggage on wheels. Kind of like that. A product nobody thought we ever needed or wanted or marketed, but after it happened, everybody's like, naturally, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, so you mentioned, and by the way, you mentioned the EU AI Act. I spent time at the summit with some folks who have really been leaders in shaping that within the EU Parliament and the European Commission in Brussels. So they were well represented here. I do think that there's some tiers of companies, and we should get back to at some point some of maybe the big picture global implications of what's happening in AI. As technologists, I think sometimes we get really buried in what a particular organization is or isn't doing, but we can come back to that in a moment. But I do think that one of my observations is that different technology companies are kind of driving in different lanes when it comes to the ethics and the law and the regulatory and the trustworthiness of artificial intelligence. I think that, Microsoft is among the very, very best. I think Microsoft is an exemplar relative to other technology companies when it comes to how seriously they take this. You then have some others, definitely not looking at you, makers of grok, that I'm looking at you, makers of grok, that don't seem to have any sort of appreciation for the ethics or the responsible, the trustworthy implications around AI. And then you have all of these, technology partners and implementers and consulting firms that, many of them I think are just clueless. It's not the result of a deliberate decision.
How much of that do you think is just the hype of people who pretend or say that, regulation doesn't matter or regulation is going to hinder innovation, where it comes to actually building an AI product or using AI teams and putting something out there? How many of these organizations do you think actually do it without even thinking whether they abide by the rules or not?
Yeah.
How many of them actually take the chance of being sued
I
and
think
put out of business?
That's interesting, because I just saw it. I don't know, it was on some social media, it might have been X, which said what the implication, because it's August, right? So
yes.
I think the rules kick in on the EU AI Act, right? The penalty.
2nd of August.
Yeah.
Correct.
They progressively kick in over a period of 3 years, but the 2nd of August was a milestone. I believe it was the 2nd.
Right. So they gave, is it the 7% penalty of your revenue? The worst case. So it's basically the worst. But they did it, and they took a range of companies like Meta, Alphabet, blah, 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 smaller companies as well, and just put the dollar figures up about what it means if they breach. As in, and this is some serious money that's at stake. But I want to riff, Anna, on what you just said then about sometimes I feel that people take a negative bent on regulation. It's going to stifle innovation, right? Is the kind of...
That's the banner, right?
Yeah.
It's going to stifle innovation. Like Europe is stopping progress.
But here's the crazy thing. I think one of the most incredible inventions of our time has been electricity.
Correct.
And electricity and the innovation that's come off the back of electricity has been phenomenal. But it is highly regulated because it can kill you. Right? You plug a fork into that socket and hold on to it. Good luck in surviving. And someone put a brilliant RCD on your switchboard that said, shit, someone's about to die. Let's cut the power to the circuit because of regulation that's in that industry. Just not anybody can go and do wiring and stuff. They've got to be formally gone through a 10,000 hour training program to be able to,
Yeah.
legally wire your house, your business, etc. And so I think that regulation is not a dirty word. It enables innovation, but it means that less people die through the enablement of the innovation.
Exactly. And then you have, I think last time we were talking, Mark, about the super developers, right? Like we were saying, people who make billion, like 10 millions a year, because they can do development and product ownership and ideation. And do you think those dudes are going to risk their job to putting out there a product that is not regulated?
Mm.
Yeah. And I also think that there's a in addition to safety, right? There are ways that regulation can, and we'll maybe look at the opposite argument here, but there are ways that regulation can actually, accelerate production, accelerate productivity, accelerate innovation, right? So
gives you a process, right? You know what to do.
Well, it also means that you don't have, you start to have organizations land on standards that can be common, right?
Yeah.
So you start to have organizations, and I don't think this was a result of a regulatory decision, but you start to have, all of the manufacturers of screws basically start to make screws that either have a Phillips head or a flat head, right?
Yeah.
So that you can use any screwdriver. So, I think that there's an opportunity there. Either the market will correct itself some will certainly argue that the market will correct itself into a standards-based approach, and then some will, point to Apple and the infamous and horrible lightning cable as saying, that the market didn't correct itself without a bit of regulation. So I see the regulatory argument as cutting both ways, purely from an economic and a what's best for the industry perspective, setting aside what's best for the world.
So did you see a lot of that being talked about at the AI for Good? Talk to us about some innovations that you've never seen before, and you had to be there to see it, kind of.
Well, so I don't necessarily know if I don't necessarily know if I can think of anything like innovations that you would have had to be there to see, but I can certainly I can share some thoughts on topics that were talked about, right? So there's lots of talk, and I'll start in generalities here. There's lots of talk about how the success or failure of AI is not purely a technical concern. To a very significant degree, it's a cultural concern, and both cultural within the macro society, but also cultural within organizations. Like, does the workplace culture have the wherewithal to be able to seize upon this, right? And then do societies, right? Do however you want to slice that, do nations, states, regions, do they have the expertise, but also the infrastructure capacity, which can come in many different forms, right? It can come in terms of energy production. It can come in terms of connectivity. It can come in terms of computing power. There's so many different dimensions of this, but does a particular a slice of the world have the wherewithal to be able to, the capacity to be able to keep up and get ahead? There's a statistic that I haven't verified this, but it was discussed in several instances at the summit, where 90%, according to the statistic, something like 90% of the world's artificial intelligence capacity is controlled by two countries, ultimately, right? Now, it might be resident in another country. Probably a good example of this, right, is the work that, Microsoft is doing. And I think that I know some people who would disagree with me on this, but I think Microsoft is doing an admirable job of detaching compute power that is based in Europe. They call this the sovereign, the European sovereign clouds, right? Mm-hmm. Detaching that from control of the United States. But at the end of the day, Microsoft's parent company is an American company, right? So 90% of the ultimate ownership of AI capacity is resident in either the United States or China, which is, a significant problem for everyone except for the United States and China. And I think a really significant problem for the likes of the European Union or Japan or Australia, some of these very, very modern, heavily, very modern, very sophisticated, economically and technologically sophisticated, wealthy countries that in some ways, important ways, don't necessarily control their own destiny when it comes to the capacity to generate artificial intelligence compute.
Yeah. It's super interesting. We're on this wave of such incredible technological change and I think reimagining of work that is happening around the world. And I am struggling, if you like, to reconcile it with the amount of increase in wars, famines, and even climate-related things, like we've seen the fourth largest earthquake off the coast of Russia in the last week or so.
Yeah.
Tsunami warnings, etc. One of the things I start my day with, because for some time I have struggled with the increasing amount of bullshit in our lives that is coming from everywhere. So much so, actually, just a little book plug here. It's called Calling Bullshit, and it's Calling Bullshit, The Art of Skepticism in a Data-Driven World. And it's written by a data scientist, published in 2020. And you read this, and the case studies, the first two chapters are just case studies that when you read them, you're like, I've heard of this, I've seen this in the social media, etc. I mean, it goes back to Bill Clinton and how he used phrases around his indiscretion with Monica Lewinsky, for example, and how people and particular media companies, etc., how they say something knowing that what they're saying sounds truthful, but they're saying it to lead you in a direction that is not truthful.
Yeah.
And what blows me away is that was all pre-Gen AI, right? And everything I'm reading, I'm just like, oh my gosh, you add AI into the mix and what it can do around understanding an individual and therefore creating a conversation. And I'm talking about, of course, the AI is not going to intelligently do that. It's going to be, but it's powerful people that fund the systems that will enable that to become a reality. And like overnight, we've seen the dropping of things, open sourcing of models from OpenAI. They're straight away, Microsoft announces that within 12 hours, their availability in Azure as a service you consume. And all of a sudden, you're providing models where people can turn the guardrails off. And I mean, this has been around for some time, right? You've been able to download and run locally. Hardware is able to run these things much more efficiently. You can get higher spec graphics cards.
Now you have help. You just go to another AI module and ask it how to do it.
That's it.
It's not like, and also like looking back at this conference, this is AI for good, like widely held by the UN. So clearly these organizations who want the good of the people are feeling, I don't want to say threatened, but definitely affected by exactly what you're saying, Mark. Like today I had a workshop and somebody was saying, did you try to to generate some scripts, with Python and GPT-4 to achieve this level of data processing? And the other party didn't say yes or no, but they alluded to the fact that they don't necessarily have the skill in the team, or that, they need to bring other people in to actually do these things. And the person who asked the question, he's like, oh, wait, like I can just ask the AI, It will like write 70% of your stuff for you. It's not. So you're absolutely right. More and more of these things are being made open source, and if you are an entity, then probably you are going to look at regulation. And if you're not, if you're just a dude, what are you actually going to do in your parents' garage?
Well, this is what, is that we're making incredibly powerful tools available to people that are potentially bad actors. And where they needed a group of bad actors to come together to do something in the past, their potential now to run as a lone ranger, so to speak, and your counter buddy is AI or any number of AIs to support whatever you want to do. Mustafa Suleyman, in his book that I've quoted before, talks about with gene splicing, and all the developments that were made with CRISPR and the technology now to do this. You can buy a $10,000 machine that you could run in your garage to do this, and with the aid of AI, start coming up with pathogens, for example.
Exactly.
That are hyper-resistant, that are hyper-contagious.
Right. Playing with mRNA, right?
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's just nuts. And so,
right.
But he even says in his book, when he presented this to executives, to universities, he goes, you know what people do when they hear this type of thing? They put their hands over their ears, not literally, but they don't want to know. They don't want to. And so I'm kind of like, I'm so pro AI and the advantages, and then I'm going, but hang on, we've got to really maintain the balance here, because let's say even like the job displacement thing, and for me, I don't fear job displacement because I am riding this wave. But how many people are in our society that aren't even aware that there's a wave? They have no access to the technology. And so all of a sudden they're going to be displaced by something they didn't even know really existed, maybe outside. They might even listen to news.
We were talking about this before we hit record, but so I've been working on this article that I think, barring the unforeseen, I think the article will probably be out and published prior to the podcast, so we can put a link in the show notes. But so the article, let me back up. In 1986, Paul Simon published an album called Graceland. And just as an aside, you can argue with me, everyone can argue with me. It is my favorite and I think the best album of my lifetime, but neither here nor there. But in Graceland, the first track is a song called The Boy in the Bubble, or Boy in the Bubble. And so the working title of my article, I've lifted it from the song. So the working title is These Are the Days of Miracle and Wonder. This is the Long Distance Call. And the reason that I love this song for this moment is, if you go listen to it, and I'll read you some of the lyrics here in a moment. But what Paul Simon does in this song is he juxtaposes the technological advancement of the time. And remember, this was 1986. He juxtaposes the technological advancement of the time with some of the problems in the world of the time, problems of terrorism, problems of the concentration of wealth, problems. Some of this might sound very familiar, right? We haven't exactly solved a lot of these problems. So, you go look at that, and so the refrain of the song is, these are the days of miracle and wonder. This is the long distance call, the way the camera follows us in slow-mo, the way we look to us all, the way we look to a distant constellation that's dying in the corner of the sky. These are the days of miracle and wonder, and don't cry, baby, don't cry. And then there's one verse that I like a lot at the end. I can't really explain. One of his last verses is, it's a turnaround jump shot. It's everybody jump start. It's every generation throws a hero up the pop charts. Medicine is magical and magical is art. Think of the boy in the bubble and the baby with the baboon heart. And I believe these are the days of lasers in the jungle somewhere, staccato signals of constant information, a loose affiliation of millionaires and billionaires, and baby, these are the days of miracle and wonder. And what I'm doing in the article, you can go read it for yourself, is I'm trying to explore some of these ways that, maybe in some cases apocalyptic, but in some cases otherwise just earth-shattering in ways that we may come to regret, right?
Yeah.
And this is the unchecked use of AI. I mean, Simon wasn't writing about artificial intelligence, but he might as well have if you go listen to the song.
Oh my gosh. When you read it out, I was just like, was he a seer? Did he see this future? Because you couldn't get the accuracy is just phenomenal in describing the time we're in at the moment, I feel.
Yeah, well, and some of the ways that and some of this is inspired by the conversations that I was having at the AI for Good Summit, and some of them other things that I've been observing. So maybe on the more benign side, but still I think really pretty earth-shattering. But certainly no one is going to. Maybe not certainly, but this is not life or death. But something I've thought about for a long time, and this is something that Juan Levis-Taferes at Microsoft, who leads the Microsoft AI for Good Lab, and he's the chief data scientist there. He's been talking about and thinking about is the prevalence of English as the lingua franca of the internet, right? So, and my statistics might be a bit off here, but they're going to be fundamentally correct. 50% of the internet is written in English. All right.
Wow.
The next most common language on the internet is Spanish, and that's 6% of the internet. So you start to stack that up, and what you quickly see, right? I mean, where are these large language models trained? Well, they're trained on the corpus of knowledge that is available for them to consume on the internet, where 50% is in English, and the next largest language is Spanish at 6%. So, as you start to snowball that, right, you get, okay, well, what does that do as synthetic knowledge becomes more prevalent, right? So where future models are actually being trained on content that previous models have created. And then what does that in turn do? How does that introduce bias that is not malicious? It's not malevolent bias, but it is bias that is transmitted, the cultural bias of ideas that are most commonly communicated in English, okay?
Yeah.
Simply because these are the cultural ideas, kind of the I hate to call it this, but what I think some might refer to as the Western philosophical tradition. And how do we deal with trustworthy and responsible AI from a bias perspective when you have that so baked in to the language that these models, these large, the middle eld, right, these models are using. But then what do we see over time? And I don't think we have data points for this, but what do we see over time this does to the dominance of the global language, which I think, is pretty indisputably English at this point. But how does that accelerate that dominance while also accelerating the demise of some smaller yet beautiful and certainly culturally significant languages? And I think that that's a really, and again, I decided I would start with something that isn't likely to kill a lot of people, but we could get darker from here for sure.
It's funny what you say about bias there, because I've been writing a book, and I would take my chapter on conclusion and get AI to review it. And the identification of bias in my writing, so an example of like turning a blind eye.
Yeah.
It can seem pretty benign. It's an idiom, right? Yet in it is biasness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And I couldn't, falling on deaf ears is another common one. Crippled by fear. There's so many stuff that, that's a lame excuse. I just ran a few because I was just like, and what I found very interesting is that I try to be hard on myself in using biased speech and deliberate. It's kind of like your filters change the more you become aware of things and how so easy it is to creep into our life. Well, we don't even know, and how that use of language and therefore the training of models, et cetera, that you're seeing.
What I really want to encourage people, because I know that there's a furious debate, particularly in the United States, but I think that a form of this debate happens elsewhere. But there's a furious debate right now about what has been branded as DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to me, this is actually not at the core. This is not a DEI. This is not a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue. This is not it is to some extent a fairness issue, but I think that there's a root issue here that I think I'm going to say maybe naively shouldn't be political, right? Yeah. But I'm sure someone could make it political. But that's really about how people communicate with one another and how people understand one another. So, and this is not something that simply goes on between speakers of different languages, right? There are, Ana and I have Ana is a native Romanian speaker who's exceptionally good an exceptionally good English speaker, but, two people of different native tongues have to come to understand one another, particularly in the ways that language speakers communicate and the idioms that they use and the subtleties that they use that really can't be taught in a textbook. Yeah. And what I'm thinking right now is when I was younger, I spent about 10 years growing up in West Virginia, which is kind of part of the American Appalachian region, which borders on the South. Anyway, I don't remember who this was or where in my past, but there was a phrase that an adult used that was something to the effect of "Lord willing and the creek don't rise," what that means is if everything works out the way we hope it will, I'll see you soon, or we'll be able to do whatever it might be. But if you were to just say to a non-native, if you were to say to most native English speakers, use the phrase "Lord willing and the creek don't rise," even a native English speaker would have to sit and think to themselves, what? What does that possibly mean?
Yeah, exactly. And being passed down from centuries. It's part of a lexicon. Hey, Andrew, it's been great talking to you, as always. Join us next time. Hopefully we'll be back next week. All being well.
Thanks, guys. See you.
Thanks for tuning into the Ecosystem Show. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and thought-provoking. And maybe you had a laugh or two. Remember, your feedback and challenges help us all grow. So don't hesitate to share your perspective. Stay connected with us for more innovative ideas and strategies to enhance your software estate. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries and creating value. See you on the next episode.
Are you ready to accelerate your career in the Microsoft ecosystem? The 90-Day Mentoring Challenge, created by Mark Smith, is your opportunity to create a personalized pathway to success. Join over 1,200 alumni from more than 70 countries who have achieved remarkable results, from promotions to new job opportunities. Take it from Nathan, who said, "Since completing the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge, I've become an MVP in business applications and doubled my income." Or from Parves, who shares, "I've never felt as inspired or energized about my career as I do now." Sign up at arcor.nz365guide.com. You can find the link in the show notes. And if you use the code podcast, you'll get 10% off.